Terrific. Thank you, Jen. Good afternoon to everyone, and thank you for joining us for our webinar today, What Does It All Mean? Incorporating Giving USA's new findings into your plan giving work. My name is Nathan Stelter, president here at the Stelter Company, and happy to be here and introduce our presenter. But before I do, I'd like to say just a few words about our webinar series. As many of you know, Stelter, as a leader in the plan giving industry, is committed to always bringing these types of curriculum and webinar and learning opportunities to you, along with our innovative solutions and education to the industry. We're always happy to host these complimentary webinars, as well as our whole slate of webinars throughout the year. This webinar is actually our second of our 2020 curriculum. We also have presenting this year the good folks from George Washington University on lessons they've learned by running not one, but two legacy challenges that will be, I believe, next month. Pamela Davidson, renowned consultant, will be giving cues and clues on what your prospects are telling you and what you need to say in return. The infamous Catherine Myrie will teach you how to design the perfect marketing strategy for your gift planning program. And our good friend Russell James, Dr. Russell James out of Texas Tech, will share his most recent observations on baby boomers. Those, along with quite a few, can be found on Stelter's website at stelter.com/webinars. As always, we'll be sending information out prior to register, but you can register now and put it on your calendar if you're OCD like me and want to have it advanced registration. Now back to the presentation today. I'm happy to introduce you to our presenter, Dave Smith, President and CEO of the Heaton Smith Group. Dave founded Heaton Smith Group back in February of 2009, and since it has become the leader of blended and documents estate gifts in its space. Dave brings more than 20 years of experience in the nonprofit sector and has worked with nonprofit institutions and their donors across the country. Just talking to Dave just before the presentation, he's probably on the road about 75% of the time, working with clients and partners alike. He's been serving clients from a wide range of missions, including healthcare, academic, medicine, higher ed, arts and culture, and much more. He's facilitated more than $350 million for the nonprofit sector. His work includes individuals and couples with modest estates, as well as high net worth individuals, couples, and families with private foundations and family offices. Dave serves on the board of directors for Giving USA Foundation and the Giving Institute, of which this presentation has come through today, both out of Chicago. He's a member of the National Association for Charitable Gift Planners, Georgia Plan Giving Council, and the Association of Healthcare Philanthropy. Native of Kentucky, Dave graduated from the University of Kentucky with a BS in psychology. Dave attained his Chartered Advisor and Philanthropy designation from the American College in 2017, and currently he and his family reside in Atlanta. So without further ado, I will pass it on to Dave. It's all yours, Dave.
Nathan, thank you. Nathan and Jen, grateful for the opportunity to present today. Grateful for all the work that the Stelter Company does in our field to advance the cause of plan giving, and certainly to help your plethora of clients in this country and abroad facilitate and secure plan gifts for those organizations. Every 2 to 3 years, the Giving USA Foundation conducts a special research project outside of the annual project that we fund, done through the Lilly School. And 3 years ago, as we were meeting, it became apparent that we wanted to do something in the area of gift planning, particularly with live donors. So I got very excited about this project because it is really the first broad-based research project for gift planning donors since, I think, year 2000. Well, lots happened in the last 20 years. We've lived through the Great Recession. We've had a lot of tax law changes in that period of time, several presidents, multiple Congresses, Senate, et cetera. So a lot's happened, so we wanted to take a fresh look. For those of you who don't read the annual report, it's published every June. In 2019 report found that in 2018, $427 billion were given to the nonprofit sector in this country. The majority of that was given by individuals, almost 300 million. But nearest and dearest to our hearts, of course, would be bequest. And bequest totaled almost $40 billion, or 8% of the total giving. Interestingly, last April, I think it was last April, the Chronicle Philanthropy published a new study that found that really we're in the middle of an unprecedented opportunity in terms of capturing dollars as assets are transferred from one generation to the next. The study found that an estimated $8.8 trillion will be transferred by Americans to the next generation between 2017 and 2027. That's a remarkable number that none of us can really wrap our heads around, but we know the choices for those dollars to flow would be to children, other heirs, taxes, and hopefully, and of course, philanthropy. The study did not estimate a percentage that will go to philanthropy, but that's our job, right? To engage our donors, talk about the impact we're having on those we serve, engage our donors, and X percentage of those donors are going to ultimately include our organizations in their estate plan. If you want to read a summary of that report, you can go to our website. A pop-up window will appear and it gives you instructions. It's a summary, but importantly, it directs you to where you can purchase. It's a really interesting study, and I suggest that you read it. I'm going to talk today about some of the key findings that I hope you'll find interesting and that perhaps will help you shape or even reshape your current plan giving program. Candidly, I need to move through this data fairly quickly. I hope that after today that you will go to the Giving USA Foundation store and purchase the report either electronically or the hard copy. Put on your hats, put on your bike hats and bike helmets, and off we go. Let's see what we learned. So one of the first areas that we learned about was donors' perspective on the gift planning process, which I think is very interesting, very relevant to our work. The good news is, I'd say the great news is that 68% of the respondents said that they found the gift planning process easy to somewhat easy. The number of respondents in the study was about 900 donors. We had 27, I think, participating organizations. So this is a statistically significant donor pool, and 68% of those respondents found the plan giving process easy. Hopefully that means that as gift officers, as advisors, as consultants, we're doing a better job of talking about plan giving. We're doing a better job marketing plan giving. And ultimately, hopefully, we're doing a better job of stewarding plan giving. 23% said that they were neutral, and then 10% found that process difficult. Well, what plan giving vehicles did donors in this study choose? 68% chose bequest, no surprise there, right? Given the ease at which one can name a charitable beneficiary in their estate, in their will or trust. 30% chose retirement beneficiary designation. 19% chose life insurance and charitable trusts. Maybe the only surprise here, DAFs outnumbered CGAs. DAFs was 14%, CGAs was 12%. But as you will see, wealth informs gift type selection by donors, and I think that is why CGAs they're at the bottom of this list. But real quick, half of all respondents reported their largest gift to a specific percentage rather than a specific amount, a percentage of their net estate rather than a specific amount. Sorry about that. I don't know if you noticed, but the percentage of donors who said the process was somewhat easy, it was the exact percentage of donors who chose a bequest. I'm not a researcher, but I would imagine there's got to be some correlation between these two, the ease at which we can name a charitable beneficiary in our will or trust, and the ease at which we find that. So I think there's that is definitely at play. Well, how does wealth factor into the types of gifts that these donors funded? You know, intuitively, you know from your work that donors who have a $2 million estate, they often have different needs and goals versus donors who have estates worth 12, 15, 20, 25 million and above, right? Therefore, the study found that donors with net assets of 1 to 10 million were likely to have charitable bequests in their wills versus charitable trusts. Alternately, donors with net assets greater than 10 million were more likely to have funded charitable trusts. Importantly, and this is an important point, all the charitable trusts in the study were inter vivos or current charitable trusts, none were testamentary. My colleagues and I have found this to be very true. Like the study sample, Heaton Smith sample is a large statistically significant number of donors, and we just don't find many donors in the 1 to 10 million net worth range that fund charitable trusts. There are always exceptions, but candidly, I think in part, since few donors in the lower asset range needed a charitable trust for intergenerational transfer purposes, they'll just choose something less complex, something simple like a bequest, beneficiary designation, or certainly a life insurance policy. And then lastly, before we move on, donors who funded charitable trust, they make the largest gifts by value because they're associated with greater wealth. So their needs are different, their goals are different, and also they have more from which to plan. What I found, one of the interesting points on this slide to me is the majority of donors who funded CRTs reported they decided to do that only after they considered other alternatives. I'll give you a quick example. A few years ago, I was working with a married couple, both physicians. They decided to retire the same year. Now they would be in their early to mid 60s. They had lived a pretty frugal lifestyle, had 3 highly educated children. They were trying to sort out how much they wanted to give to their children, how much they wanted to give to 3 or 4, I can't remember, maybe 5 nonprofits. And like we do with every donor with whom we work, we'll show them the simplest way to accomplish their goals, and then we'll add a layer or layers of complexity when we think it makes sense. So I showed them what they could do through their estate plan, through bequest, beneficiary designation change. They could satisfy all that and have access to all their assets for the rest of their lives. They had already funded a donor advised fund. We talked about making additional gifts to that, and they liked that idea. But then we added kind of a third alternative, and that was a charitable lead trust, and talked about the benefits of that for them, for their heirs, and they really dialed into the ability that a charitable lead trust would give them to see how their heirs managed a small inheritance, a small lump sum. So they funded $1 million lead trust. They have 3 children. In 10 years' time, now in, I guess, 7 years' time, those children will inherit approximately 300 to 350, maybe 375, depending on the market. But they'll inherit about $300,000, much smaller amount than they're going to inherit ultimately from their parents. But it gives the parents an ability to see how their children steward that smaller number. It ended up, they made a $250,000 gift from their DAF to this client, and then the client gets $50,000 a year from this client. So it turned out to be a very elegant gift, but we started with something simple, ended with something more complex because of the goals of the donor. And that, again, comports with what the respondents in this study reported. Well, let's look at some average gifts. If there was a surprise to us, it was the average gift size of the ones reported in this study. The average bequest was $511,000. Maybe the only one that wasn't a huge surprise was the retained life estate, because of real estate, obviously a real estate gift, and because the markets have recovered so much. So that was the only surprise. But 30%, excuse me, the top 3% of all gifts reported were excluded. If those had remained in the mean, then the mean bequest was actually more than $800,000. The mean charitable lead trust was above $3 million. So there were some really large gifts in this study. 54% of the respondents reported their largest gift was a bequest. Again, not a surprise. 50%, I thought this was good news, had not altered their planned gifts, but 50 of the ones who had 44% of those made changes. They increased the number of gifts in their estate plan, and 45% increased the gift amount. So good news for those nonprofits. Well, what can your organizations do to attract plan giving donors? A study looked at what internal organizational relationship and external organizational relationship. Let's start with the internal. How do you create positive conditions for planned gifts? Consistently, respondents indicated that a nonprofit's demonstration of impact, efficiency, and trust that they have in your organization determined whether or not the organization was selected as a charitable beneficiary. Put simply, nonprofits that demonstrated efficiency and trust and impact, they're the ones who won the minds and hearts of donors, right? The next two, I think, are incredibly important and may be two of the highest reasons that high-performing nonprofits are securing more planned gifts than lower-performing nonprofits. Nonprofits' willingness to engage in long-term personal relationship with donors, I have found that makes all the difference. It's not just the nonprofits who are engaging with volunteers that's necessary. 30% of the respondents had been a volunteer to one of the 27 participating organizations. So not even half had served as volunteers, but they had made a commitment of time, of effort, resources, obviously money, they're paying staff, developed a strategy, and the staff had the discipline to build those long-term relationships over time. And that paid off because if you look at these averages, these are very large gifts. So develop long-term personal relationship with donors, engage volunteers and board members. That is something you control. UBS very quickly did a study several years ago that looked at donors, at their clients who give. I think it's called Doing Good at Doing Well, something like that, maybe 2014. And it found that well more than 50% of the respondents didn't think their gifts were having an impact. So that speaks to the fact that you have to demonstrate your impact. You have to develop long-term relationships, engage volunteers. These are things in your control. Well, what are external? What things are not in your control? Obviously, no heirs. That's something that's a descriptive of your donor pool, and you will have maybe 20, 21, 22, 23% of your donors who are single, no children, married, no children, and they're great plan giving prospects. One of the things highlighted in the study is that the respondents, they all had a personal value of generosity and history of philanthropy. So they weren't just giving to the organizations who participated in the study, they were giving to multiple organizations, and then many of the respondents had more than one, two, three, or four nonprofits as a charitable beneficiary in their estate plan. So there's this personal value of philanthropy that these donors shared. And then donors had to have enough wealth, enough capacity, right, to support their heirs and nonprofits most important to them. My apologies. So this last point, I want to camp out here a little bit and talk to you about that. Something that my colleagues and I have observed, that donors with financially mature or comfortable heirs, they actually comprise the majority of donors who document gifts with our clients. I often describe it this way: if to a client is there, and a donor, is there exists kind of two strands held in tension, right? Which include the desire for heirs to receive a meaningful inheritance and the desire for those individuals to leave a legacy at institutions most important to them. So how that's articulated to us is donors will say, well, we educated our children and thus they have significant advantages over others. Their education is part of their inheritance. Our children are fine, they're comfortable, they're wealthy in their own right. Maybe if they have 2 or 3 children, one married into a wealthy family, and they'll say they have no financial worries and they never will. And then they talk about their desire to assign part of their assets for philanthropic purposes. But these are the things we hear. So what's this charge to us as you think about this? I think the charge to us is we have to learn more about the donor's heirs, more about their children, and develop a set of questions to help you do that. And just to kind of punctuate the point of that, some donors will say, look, we're concerned about creating trust fund children. I don't hear that a whole lot, but we do hear it. But Charlie Collier says that the most important question that a donor has to answer is how much inheritance is enough for my children or my heir. We put it a little different way, how much is enough or how much is too much, and that question is put before a donor depending on their situation. But that's an important question, it's personal, and the answers are determined by a host of factors, including geography, family history, and again, the maturity of their donors. But these are things, again, that are external to you, that you have no control, but you need to know about them, and you need to have a way to engage your donors, and that is to talk about these, and that's only done by you as a gift officer developing long-term personal relationship with these donors. So the study looked at enablers and barriers to plan gifts, and we're going to run through these. Firstly, organizations encourage donors to consider a planned gift by demonstrating, again, impact, efficiency, and trustworthiness. Donors want to know you're going to be around for a significant amount of time after they're gone, and that's very important. Secondly, recipients, they had a personal relationship with multiple individuals at the organizations they chose for a planned gift. This was a very important point that was punctuated throughout the study. And one effect of developing these strong relationships was it gave donors sort of an inside track or view of those organizations. And so that developed trust. They saw that the organizations were being very impactful. And over time, that organization increased in terms of on the list. They rose on the list to be, top 1, 2, or 3 nonprofit. And then donors learned, and then thirdly, organization invested time and resources with donors and built those relationships over time. This wasn't a 1 or 2 year, 3 year deal. It was multiple. A majority of the respondents in this study had given to the participating organizations 20 plus years. So that's a long time. That is not the typical donor we work with. They've been involved, but not 20 plus years. But that's, with respect to the respondents in the study, that was the length of their involvement. And then fourthly, organizations offered these volunteer experiences, board service, again, giving donors multiple views of the organization. Very, very important. I think this tells us that we need to think of ourselves, whether you're annual gift officer, major, principal, plan, VP, whomever, that we need to think of ourselves as just one link in the plan giving chain. There are annual gift officers today who are working with future plan giving donors, but you don't know that yet, right? So the encouragement is, now we know what donors expect, we as institutions have to put all that in place, right? We have a client, fairly new client, who we're working with us to help them increase the number of their documented, state, and blended gifts. It's a top drawer performing arts organization, very financially healthy, and they hosted a focus group that included current legacy donors. This was last fall, and the feedback very much reflected this list across the top. Strong relationships occurred over time, meaningful volunteer experiences, and 1 or 2 of them had served on the board. But indulge me a minute to read some of their feedback. I think it's fascinating. This is both leadership and legacy donors. One of the most important factors to look for in new legacy bequest is long-term loyalty to the organization that is anchored in memories and our ability to connect with members in a meaningful way. I love that phrase, anchored in memories. That is the organization building a memory map of experiences with the organization. So years down the road, when that donor is sitting in front of their advisor, hopefully you're with them, but if you're not, they have this memory map of experiences with your organization that's going to serve you very well. I love that phrase. And then from a legacy donor, to punctuate the point, we never dreamt that we were going to create what we did. We just hoped we could finish it. That reminds me of when Yo-Yo Ma was here and he had students play with him right on stage, and the students were in such awe. That is a legacy, a sense of awe that this has happened and that we were part of it. You can feel the emotion in the feedback. They were part of it. They've owned this organization's mission. They've owned the impact. And in this case, a large plane gift. So what is your organization? My question to you, what's your organization doing to build memory maps with your donors? Candidly, that may be the most important question from our time today. And in lieu of time, I'm going to move on to barriers to plan giving. They're fairly simple and no surprise. Internal to the organization, one barrier is organizations, their lack of personal and consistent contact with donors. Of course, this is Stewardship 101, but some organizations do this really well, some are average, and some don't do it so well. And the ones who don't do it so well, in some cases even average, they are likely to lose a plane gift or two along the way, and the mission drift or change. That was quite obvious. The external ones are concerns about late life healthcare costs. That's nothing that we can control as a gift officer, and concerns about impact on relatively small gifts. Simple point here, because you can't mitigate all the concerns a donor has around healthcare costs and small gifts. You can, though, control your marketing messages, and your marketing to donors should always include small gifts. I'm guilty of talking about larger gifts that we facilitate in partnership with clients, but we also facilitate a lot of smaller gifts. Have those part of your website, collateral material that you distribute, plan giving brochure, whatever, just to know that donors who don't have a lot of capacity or have these concerns, that is part of your culture, that a gift of 5, 10, 15, 20, 50, whatever it is, can have an impact just like a gift of 50,000, 5 million, or 50, right? The greatest enabler to me, and this was actually highlighted in the study, relationship building is the core competency in planned gift fundraising, period. So I'll be honest, if you find yourself behind your desk more than you do in front of donors, maybe that this is not your skill set, that building relationships is not your skill set. You have other skill sets that can be used effectively, but relationship building really is the core here. With regard to gift disclosure, this was the area, because of our firm's work, this was the area that I was most interested in reading, and candidly, some of these statistics surprised even us. 52% reported they always report planned gifts to recipient organizations, big number. 38% said they sometimes report, and then only 8.89% said that they never report. However, 86%, almost 87% of donors informed organizations who had received their largest planned gift. So that's a very high number. But again, you have to look at the fact pattern of these donors. They're not the fact pattern of every nonprofit's planned giving donor. 70%, I thought this was fascinating, 70% of donors in the study told recipient organizations voluntarily. I must say, that says a lot about those organizations' culture that they've created to encourage gift disclosure, gift documentation, and proper stewardship. This came from a leader of this client I talked about earlier. People love to share good stories because it makes them feel good It underscores making a good choice, and this is the key, and that choice made it through their high standards. We all like to be with winners, right? And I petition to you that a lot of plan giving donors, they want to know other donors are making the same decision that they've made, and that's why gift disclosure is a great thing. What about those who didn't disclose? Why didn't they? Well, they didn't want special recognition, and they wanted to retain control over the gift amount. And all I can say here is they can still retain control over the gift amount. If they just want to disclose to you, then you get to thank them while they're alive. They still don't have to be recognized publicly. They don't have to join a legacy society, on a donor list, and they can retain full control of the gift amount. Years ago, I'm in Louisville, Kentucky, at Louisville's oldest nonprofit called the Home of the Innocents, presenting to the executive committee and finished the presentation, walk out with the then VP, Linda, and in front of us was a very large oil painting of this lovely woman, kind of typical oil painting. She's in a ball gown, lots of jewelry, standing in front of a fireplace, whatever. So obviously, Linda, this is a donor. Tell me about her. And she said, well, she was a consistent donor, never made really large gifts. But when she died, she left us what was heretofore had been their largest planned gift, and it was, I can't remember, $7, $8, $9 million, multi-million-dollar gift. This is what she said. I've never forgotten it, and I use it a lot, and I hope you will too. She said, this gift never felt complete because we never had the opportunity to thank her for her generosity during her lifetime. And so if I'm passionate about plan gift disclosure, that sold me. That one comment sold me. I thought it was so well put. Well, with regard to recognition and stewardship, what do donors want? Interestingly, they don't want as much as maybe we assume. The good news is the participating organizations in the study, they actually overperformed on stewardship. 41% of donors wanted to be included on a legacy list. 37 want to join a legacy society. I thought that was a little low. 32% wanted personal contact face-to-face, and then almost 40%, 39, wanted no recognition. The key here is you have to ask, and whatever the donor says, how they want to be recognized, we have to honor that, and that's very important. As Nathan said, we're the leader in documented estate and plan gifts. But what's interesting is even though that's the case, so more than 50% of the gifts we facilitate or document with the client, very few of those donor stories are told in publications or websites. Some are only known to staff, leadership, board, etc. Some are told in smaller settings, whatever. The client always abides by the recognition that the donor wants. But at least when the gift is documented, the organization has a chance to say thank you while they're alive. A quick note here, as I said before, always ask, because actually donors in the study said, we don't want as much as you think. They wanted contact face-to-face once or twice a year, and they just want to know how the organization was doing, what impact they were having, anything material had changed once or twice a year. So again, not a big time commitment. So what are the implications for us as gift planners, right? How do we identify the high likelihood legacy giving prospects? How do we market legacy gifts to motivate donors to consider us for a plan gift? And then proper stewardship to retain current plan giving donors. No surprise, as we all know, individuals, no children, couples, no children, long-term annual giving donors, those are all what we know to be the very good, probably best plan giving prospects. But we have found that couples with financially mature or successful children are just as strong plan giving prospects as an individual with no heirs. There is, I may have said this earlier, when individual has enough money and their heirs are secure enough, financially mature enough, that removes some of the obligation that a parent may feel that they have to give all of their assets to their heirs. And when that obligation is removed, that creates some space, right, for the parent or for the uncle, the aunt, whomever, to consider a percentage or an exact amount of their estate that would go to organizations most important to them. And so the combination, though, of couples with financially mature heirs and individuals who are highly educated, we often find when you've got that combination, you also have highly educated heirs, and they tend to be more financially successful. All of them aren't good stewards of those assets, but they too tend to be more financially successful. This combination, I promise you, will help you secure some of your largest planned gifts by amount. It's not going to be the largest number of gifts, but it will help you secure some of your largest gifts by amount. In lieu of time, I'm going to, well, let me briefly tell you the story. Several years ago, given the name of this donor, a donor profile, address, drive up, I knew the house was worth $3.6 million. That's all that showed up on the well screen. And we chatted, and long story, they decided to limit their heirs' inheritance to the federal exemption. At the time, it was like 5-1 per spouse. They had used part of it. They'd transferred a significant number of real estate holdings, income, real estate to a grantor remainder annuity trust, and still had some left. Very philanthropic, had a family foundation. Again, decided to tie the children's inheritance to the exemption amount. And 3 children, all highly educated. Parents were highly educated. This gentleman was a Fortune 500, CEO of a subsidiary of Fortune 500, maybe a Fortune 250 company, large company, household name, and so a lot of wealth. And so we started with kind of what I described before, talking about a bequest, talking about additional gifts to the foundation. But ultimately, they landed on a $3 million charitable lead trust, almost zeroed out. So high percentage payout, et cetera. So it was a large gift to a client. But couple, very wealthy, financially mature heirs, spouses were financially mature, and ultimately they made a very large gift. It's one of the largest gifts this organization has ever received. So in the next week, month, look at the donors in your profile, in your donor, in your portfolios, excuse me, and identify those who may have these 2 characteristics. I think it will help you. And then staff, long-term staff, and individuals who have made planned gifts to other organizations. Again, a lot of respondents named more than one organization as a recipient. Don't be shy because they've named another institution in their estate plan. They're still a prospect. Well, how are donors learning about planned gifts? 41% learned through the nonprofit. That's the good news. About half those learned about planned gifts from a one-on-one conversation, and a shout out to Stelter. About 40% learned through mailings. So again, very important piece of this. The other 2, the other cloud of materials and websites, that was less important, but personal visits and mail were the main ways that they learned about planned gifts from nonprofits. And then what messages should your institutions be sending to donors? The respondents in this study, these are the messages to which they responded. Mission, impact, you're trustworthy, you're financially stable, and you're going to be around a long time, and simplicity in making a gift. Those were the marketing messages that really resonated with the respondents. Russell James, I don't know how many of you heard this presentation or read, but years ago he talked about how when we as gift officers use technical language when talking to donors, lowers the percentage of response from the donor community, right? So even something as benign, in our opinion, as bequest versus estate gift, when the term estate gift was used versus bequest, I think the response rate was about 25% higher, let alone Krutz and Kratz and Nimkrutz, and talk about shutting down a conversation, right? So highlight the relative simplicity to make plan gifts to your organization, or candidly to any organization. And then impact, impact, impact. If more than half the donors that UBS surveyed say they doubt they're having the impact that they want, then our messaging needs to be how we're changing the lives of individuals that we serve. I don't know how many of you have seen, maybe it's on CNBC, somewhere I've seen this commercial multiple times of, it's like a National Humane Society where they rescue dogs. And they've got, I'm a dog lover, they've got the saddest looking dogs. And the first time I saw it, I watched the whole thing. The second time I saw that commercial, I didn't watch the whole thing. The third time, I literally changed the channel. It was too much. So we have to join the impact that we're having. We want to hook donors in emotionally, but then we want to show the successes, the impact that we're having. I want to see dogs sitting with a family, sitting in the lap of its owner, playing with children, whatever. But impact is crucial. And one of the donors from our client in this study said it's very important, legacy donors want to align with an organization that facilitates their ability to have an impact. That's very simple, but it rings true. I know it does to you. Let's talk very briefly and lastly about what did respondents tell us about stewardship and donor retention in the report, particularly since the Great Recession, which I think is important to consider. Over time, we know that assets increase, donors age, they know more about their heirs, whether they're financially mature, whether they're not. And if you're doing all these things that enable plan giving, like building a relationship, engaging volunteers, giving them access to multiple people in your organization, helping them learn more about you, to know that you're trustworthy and that you're impacting their community, then many donors in the study increase the gift value with age. I think it was 45%, if memory serves me correctly. So this is the reward of properly stewarding and retaining current donors. A percentage of them are going to increase the gift with age. Designated staff member, this rang through and more than one line of the report that plan giving donors want contact with one person. They want to be able to meet with them once or twice a year, and they want to be able, that's the person they'll go to when they have questions. If they read something about your nonprofit in the paper, they're going to call that person. If they read something about something another nonprofit is doing similar to your mission, they want someone to call and say, hey, have you thought of this? They want a designated staff member with whom they can interface on an annual basis. And then personalization and relevancy. This takes time, and I'm not pretending that you should, if you've got 75 to 125 donors in your portfolios, that you have the time to personalize the stewardship practices for every donor. But certainly your best prospects, you absolutely want to do that, and your longest term donors. Creating that further strengthens the relationship if you're tailoring their stewardship that's relevant to them, to their needs, inviting them to events relative to their interest in your organization, creating events, informational events, whether tax laws change like the Secure Act, host something that now informs your plan giving donors that the stretch IRA is dead and there are no required minimum distributions on inherited IRAs now. It has to be spent down by the end of the 10th year. create those that are relevant to them and that personalize them. Donna Bandoloni, one of my great colleagues, she led the plain giving department at Stanford's Lucille Packard Foundation for Children's Health, and also Pacific Coast Hospital in San Francisco. She always sent Valentine's Day cards to her donors who didn't have heirs. She said, probably no one else did that. But Donna did that. Very thoughtful, and again, a way to personalize the donor stewardship based on who they are, based on their interest, based on their needs. And then lastly, ask donors their recognition preference and always abide by that. They will tell you the frequency they want to be contacted. This is my experience anyway. And they'll tell you how they want to be recognized if they want to be recognized. Recognition, I'm sure you know this, but let me punctuate this. If I'm reading or listening to a plain giving donor and I'm not there yet, right? That donor has a fact pattern that some components of it may represent some things in my life. And when donors are willing to be recognized and then tell their stories, it does nothing but help an organization facilitate and secure more plain gifts, because it's helping a percentage of the donor community place themselves inside that donor's situation. If they can do it, if their situation is that similar to mine, if they can do it, so can I. Now, it may take another year or 2 or 5, depending on the maturity that donor has with that organization. But still, ask donors how they want to be recognized, abide by it. And my time is concluded. I know I've moved through this very quickly. I hope that you will take some of this data and assess it with respect to any pain points that your organization has, whether it's a stewardship piece, whether it's a marketing piece, and then let the data guide on any changes you would make to your program. I hope it will help you. I hope you go to the Giving USA Foundation store and purchase the report. It's not long. I think it's 90 pages, but much, much more detail given in the report than I had time to cover today. Nathan or Jen, back to you.
Thanks so much, David. We do have some time for Q&A, so I would recommend, we have a couple that have come in, but for those still on the call, go ahead and send your questions in. We've got a few minutes to cover them, so go ahead and don't be shy. We have, actually, one is just a comment from Scott, and he is supporting what you said about language and using simple language, commenting that Russell James recommends to use language that one would use with his grandmother, such as a gift in the will versus, say, a bequest. So he's supporting what you said about Russell James.
Good.
We have a question from Tina. Tina said, there is always a lot of talk of developing relationships. Could you provide some ideas for an NGO to implement with donors to help build that relationship?
Gosh, don't have time to fully develop that, but the starting point is going to be sitting across a table. I mean, the best way to do that is sitting across a table and having a cup of coffee, having a meal out of your office, out of their office in a more casual setting. That just changes the dynamic that the donor and you hopefully will have. And in a more casual setting, I have found candidly that donors are willing to share more relevant information with you than they otherwise would. Now, you can facilitate that, and also small group settings, going back to the idea of creating these smaller events targeted for specific donors, because again, that is building a memory map for your organization with that donor. So it's a combination, in my opinion, of sitting across the table, cultivating a new plain gift donor, cultivating a future plain gift donor, stewarding a current plan gift donor and then giving them exposure to your organization over time through getting to know people beyond yourself and exposing them to the impact that you're having through. I mean, hospitals are famous for hosting, you know, a physician who's doing something interesting in research, right? And they'll host an event like that sometime. They're rarely in someone's home, but certainly they're somewhere at the hospital or a nice restaurant, etc. So she could email me if she wants to. I have more thoughts about that, but off the cuff, that's what I would say, where she should start.
Sure, great, thank you. Laura is wondering if there was any data on how people like to be first contacted about planned giving.
No data on their preference for first contact. We just know that the majority, that 41% of the donors learned about a planned gift from one of the participating nonprofits in the study. And then 49% of those, of course, learned about it through a face-to-face meeting, and 40% learned through a mailing, and then 15, I think, percent learned through other publications. Small percentage, 13% learned through a website. So the majority learned from face-to-face and mail pieces, but we don't know if they preferred one over the other.
Sure. In your own experience, do you have a recommendation for how a plan giving officer should first reach out to a plan giving prospect?
Well, I have biases in my work, and my bias is that's done face to face. It doesn't mean it hasn't been preceded by a mailing, but you know the way I think of this is once a donor has made their 5th gift to your organization, they're saying I'm committed to your mission. They may have started, you know, who knows, as an emotional donor or you know, just appeal that you sent in the mail. But a 5th gift indicates, you know, high interest or high affinity in your mission. And then if those donors continue to give, then, you know, we suggest that you stage, you segment those donors and then stage introduction to plan giving over time. So it's you know, sometimes it's a mailing, but ultimately it is always a conversation. One of the things that I think a lot of gift officers fail to do, candidly, is spend enough time with plan giving prospects where they have enough trust from the donor for the donor to invite the gift officer to the advisory table. And I know from a lot of experience that if you're talking to a donor about something as complex as a charitable lead trust or remainder trust, whatever, if you're not at if somebody at the table if someone is at the table who knows a lot about that, you're more likely to get that gift funded by the donor. And so anyway, that's my bias is face-to-face, and my bias is after the 5th gift, segment those donors, stage introductions to introducing plan giving to those donors. So certainly, and again, it depends on the size of the organization and the maturity of the organization. Some organizations may not want to start pushing plan giving marketing information to those donors until they've made their 10th gift. Some, you know, maybe 12. But whatever the number. I did a donor query for a client last October, November, and the donor query came back. It was 2,900 donors. And for our purposes, that, good Lord, we couldn't meet with that many donors in 10 years' time. So I'm giving you a long answer to a fairly simple question. I hope I've answered it in part.
Thank you. We have a couple questions from Emily and Ashley concerning the best age at which to start talking with donors about planned giving, or the age that people start looking into planned giving, if there was any data around that.
So mid to late 50s is a good age to start marketing planned gifts to donors. I know years ago, maybe it was the study that came out in 2000, the average planned giving donor was, I think, 48. It was really young. But you know, there's a lot of data to suggest that those early gifts probably don't stay in those plans. Donors' interests may change over time. Those organizations or a particular organization may not do a good job stewarding and retaining that donor, but certainly mid to late 50s. In the study, interestingly, donors in their 60s were the majority of donors who documented their gift with a nonprofit. So that, in my opinion, that speaks to the wealth of some of those donors. They were absolutely sure that they were going to have the resources to gift all they wanted to their heirs, as well as the organizations named in their estate plan. So mid to late 50s, the study said the best ages for gift documentation are donors in their 60s.
Great, thank you. Okay, we have a question from Cherise. I think this will be our last question we'll get to today. She's wondering, what is your thought about having an attorney or someone else who specializes in the nitty-gritty details of planned giving at an event that you're hosting about planned giving?
Oh gosh, I think if they're well-versed in donor-friendly language, I would absolutely endorse that. So, you know, my qualifier is if they're well-versed in donor-friendly language. So I can't tell you how many donors that I sit with that will say, you know, I think I know what our estate plan documents say, but we're really not sure. And really, it's because they may have read the summary page, but it's just language that we don't speak, right? Normally that we don't speak. So I would my only caution is make sure that they are well versed in donor-friendly language. So they're not using the terms remainder trust, lead trust, even charitable gift annuity. Again, according to Dr. James's research, all that terminology shuts some donors down.
Sure. Okay. We are almost out of time, so we're going to go ahead and wrap up. If you do have additional questions or your question didn't get answered, Dave did offer his email address. You see that on the screen right there, and his phone number. You can reach out to him personally if you'd like to. If you have questions about the webinar or our products and services, you can reach out to Nathan or myself. Our email addresses are on the screen, and you can visit us at Stelter.com. Finally, one of the questions that came in quite often was, can we get the handouts? And the answer is yes. We're recording right now, so as long as we have no technical difficulties, we'll have the recording. We will have the presentation handouts. I will be preparing those and putting them on the website at Stelter.com/webinars. I send out an email once those are ready so that you guys know that they're there. So you can look for an email from me that will let you know that they're ready. Or if you just want to wait until Monday, for sure they'll be there on our website by Monday. That's Stelter.com/webinars. So that's all we have today. I wanted to thank David so much for spending the last hour with us, sharing his expertise. We had about 300 people on the call. I'm sure that they all really appreciated your time today, David.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Absolutely. Thanks, everyone. We hope that we see you next month for our March webinar. Have a great afternoon. Bye-bye.